We are now on the record. My name is Robert Martinetti. I'm a videographer for Galco Litigation Services. Today's date is February 5th, 2019, and the time is 9:06 a.m. This video deposition is being held in Boston, Massachusetts, in re National Opiate Litigation. The deponent is Eileen Spaulding. Counsel will be noted on the stenographic record. The court reporter is Maureen Pollard and will now swear in the witness.
Could you raise your right hand, please? Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes.
Thank you.
Good morning, Ms. Spaulding.
Good morning.
My name is Gary Gatto. We met briefly just before we went on the record. We've never met before today, correct?
Correct.
Have you ever given a deposition previously?
No.
Okay. Well, we will, just a few items by the way of background. Please let me finish my questions if you can, and I'll certainly try to let you finish your answers before, so we don't speak over each other. If any of my questions are unclear to you in any way, let me know and I'll do my best to clarify them.
Okay.
If you answer a question without asking for clarification, I'll assume you felt like you understood it. Okay.
Yes.
And it's kind of a large table, so I'll try to keep my voice up so we can all hear each other. But I'm not shouting. I'm just trying to.
I understand.
To be sure we can all be heard. We will take breaks periodically today, but if you need a break at any point, as long as there's not a question pending, just let me know and we'll accommodate that. Okay. By whom are you employed?
Mallinckrodt,
Okay. And what's your business address?
172 Railroad Avenue, Hobart, New York, 13788.
Okay. And when did you first become employed at Mallinckrodt?
December of 1998.
Okay. Before we get into your Mallinckrodt employment, just a little bit of background. Describe for me briefly your post-high school education.
So I have an associate in Computer Information Systems Technology from BYU. And I went into the workforce for Elastic Stopnut for approximately 2 years after graduation. I then worked for J.L. Hammett School Supplies as a customer service rep for 10 years. PSE&G as a customer service rep for approximately 2 years. And then I relocated to New York and started with Mallinckrodt.
Okay. What is PSE&G?
Public Service Electric and Gas. It's the electric company for the state of New Jersey.
Okay. And do you hold any professional licenses or certifications?
No.
So approximately when did you get your associate's degree?
I graduated in 1990.
Okay. All right. And prior to Mallinckrodt, did you have any employment history that was related in any way to the pharmaceuticals industry?
No.
In your undergraduate work, did you take any coursework that related to the pharmaceuticals industry?
No.
Have you done any other formal, apart from on-the-job training or internal training programs provided at Mallinckrodt, any other educational programs that you've taken that relate in any way to the pharmaceuticals industry?
Not sure I understand what you mean. Like DEA training seminars?
That would be, well, yeah, not the pharmaceuticals industry. Well, let's be as broad as we can, that relate to pharmaceuticals in any way. So that would include anything related to DEA training or the Controlled Substances Act, anything of that nature.
Yes, so I've attended several DEA pharmaceutical training seminars sponsored by the DEA, pharmaceutical industry conferences, also sponsored by DEA, HDMA, which is now known as HDA, 2 of their conferences, and Buzzio PDMA, now IQVIA. I've attended multiple industry conferences.
Okay. And have those all been during the time you were employed by Mallinckrodt?
Yes.
Okay. We'll get into that in just a bit. Tell me what you did, and I don't want you to disclose any communications with your counsel, but what did you do to prepare for today's deposition?
I met with my counsel
Okay. And how many times did you meet with counsel?
3.
And approximately when did you meet with counsel?
2 in January and 1 yesterday.
And were those personal meetings or telephonic?
Personal.
And who was present?
Kate and Andrew.
Okay. No one else?
No.
Approximately how long did each one of the meetings last?
7 to 8 hours.
Okay. And you can just answer this yes or no. Did you review any documents during those meetings?
Yes.
And did any of those documents refresh your recollection in any regard?
Yes.
And in what regards can you recall your recollection being refreshed?
Well, once I'd read the email, then it would remind me of what the topic or the subject matter was.
Okay. Is there any particular matter you can recall reviewing a document and having having that document refresh your recollection as to a specific subject matter or event?
I'm going to object and instruct the witness not to answer to the extent it would get into which particular documents we were looking at, which would be protected by the attorney-client communication privilege and work product doctrine.
So, and I think this is consistent with your counsel's instruction. I'd like you to tell me, not the document itself, but just the subject matter with the event or the subject matter as to which you can recall your recollection being refreshed by reviewing a document.
You can answer at a general level.
Whatever the subject was of the particular document, I would remember upon reading it.
Sure. Okay, fair to say then there's not a specific thing that comes to your mind as you're sitting here today of, for example, reviewing a document and having the sensation of, oh gee, I forgot all about that meeting, but now that I review this document, I remember there was such a meeting, or anything of that nature that would be more specific than just a general, well, I see a document and that at some level, it causes me to better remember something that happened some years back.
No.
Okay. Have you reviewed any transcripts of any deposition testimony given by any other witnesses in this matter?
No.
Have you have you spoken to anyone who has given a deposition in this matter with respect to their deposition?
Only that they had been deposed, nothing of the subject matter.
Okay. And who did you speak to in that regard?
Karen Harper.
Okay. Anyone else?
No.
Have you reviewed any of the papers that have been filed in court related to this litigation, including any of the complaints filed by any of the plaintiffs?
No.
Are you aware that there's in excess of 1,000 complaints that have been filed by various governmental entities, counties, municipalities, etc., relating to the opioid epidemic?
Yes.
And again, without divulging any communications with counsel, how did you first become aware of that?
It's only through counsel that I am aware of that.
Is it a subject, the litigation, is that a subject that you've had any conversations with anyone else at Mallinckrodt, again, apart from communications with counsel?
No.
Have you taken any steps to preserve any documents that might in any way relate to the subject matter of the opioid litigation?
So we have a document preservation notice that's been issued, so all documents have been preserved.
Okay, but and that would apply to documents that, for example, are on Mallinckrodt servers or on your work computer, that sort of thing?
I can only speak to my work computer.
Okay. In terms of, do you have a personal computer at home?
Actually, no, I don't.
You don't? Okay. Okay. Do you have at home any paper files that in any way relate to your work at Mallinckrodt?
No.
And have you at any time?
No. I apologize. I step back. I have taken work home previously to complete and bring back to work the next day.
But in terms of maintaining a file in a
Oh,
file
absolutely.
cabinet at your home or anything like that, that's not something you do?
No, absolutely not.
Okay. Well, let's talk about your employment at Mallinckrodt. I'd like first to just get a general sense of the positions that you've held over the years. I realize you've been there a long time, and you may be a little fuzzy on particular dates, and that's fine. This isn't a memory contest, and we'll look at some documents that may pin down some dates from time to time as we go through today. But just as a general level, if you can tell me the positions that you've held over the years at Mallinckrodt.
Sure. I started in their packaging department as a packaging operator in 1998. I was in that department for approximately a year and a half, and I transitioned into the validations department. And I was with validations for approximately 2 years. And then in April of 2001, I transitioned into the compliance role.
Okay, so prior to April of '01, in the packaging and validations positions, you can just tell me generally what responsibilities you had in those positions.
In packaging, it was working on the line that puts the tablets and capsules into the bottles, running the machinery. And then in validations, it was executing protocols and taking samples to validate products for FDA approval.
Okay. And did you receive any training with respect to either of those positions?
Yes.
What was the nature of the training?
So in packaging would have been on-the-job training, classroom training, SOP training. The same for validations. Validations, I had in the beginning a one-on-one trainer that would show me how to take samples and execute the protocols, how to write reports.
And what is SOP training?
Reading SOPs, standard operating procedures. We have a computer system that assigns us SOPs based on our curriculum, and we read those, and in some cases there's a quiz associated with those SOPs.
Okay. You said in April of '01 you transitioned to a compliance role. What was the compliance role that you transitioned into?
So in April of 2001, the reason I remember the date is because that's when our distribution center opened, and a newly created position of compliance investigator. Excuse me. Compliance investigator was created, in which I did the Arcos reporting. I would investigate any losses in transit with the carriers, made sure our reports were filed on time, handled destruction of the pharmaceutical waste, and any other tasks as assigned.
Okay, and you indicated this was a new position that was created in '01, is that correct?
Yes.
And it was related to the establishment of the distribution center?
Yes, it was an additional license that was started at the Hobart site.
And what was the nature of the additional license?
A distribution center. So previous to that, we had only had a manufacturing DEA license and an analytical license. The addition of the distribution center in Hobart created the need to have a DEA distributor license and a DEA exporter license.
And so the DEA distributor license, what did that permit Mallinckrodt to do that it hadn't done previously?
To distribute either Mallinckrodt-made products or products that were made by other manufacturers on behalf of Mallinckrodt.
So prior to having the distributor license, when Mallinckrodt had a license to manufacture controlled substances, correct?
Yes.
And so it would then, what would it then do with the controlled substances after it manufactured them?
It would send them to St. Louis for distribution.
And did Mallinckrodt in St. Louis have a distribution license?
Yes.
Okay. So the distributor license that was obtained in '01 was for the Hobart facility?
Yes.
Okay. So when you took the position of compliance investigator, to whom did you report at that time?
Liz McPhail,
And what was her position?
purchasing manager.
And for how long did that reporting relationship continue?
I don't recall exactly.
Was it some number of years?
A few years.
Okay. And to whom did you report after you no longer reported to Ms. McPhail?
To the materials manager,
And who was that?
Tim Bach, and then later Aaron Nicoletti.
And for how long did those reporting relationships continue?
In a few years.
Okay. And after that, to whom did you report?
Karen Harper,
Do you recall approximately when you began reporting to Ms. Harper?
2008 sometime.
And do you recall what her position was at that time?
Senior manager of controlled substances compliance.
And for how long did your reporting relationship with Ms. Harper continue?
I'm still reporting to Karen Harper.
Okay. The position compliance investigator, which you indicated was a new position when you took it in '01, did you receive a written job description or a list of responsibilities?
I don't remember.
How did you come to have that position? Did you apply for it?
Yes, there was a posting internally of which I applied and was interviewed and awarded the position.
Do you recall by whom you were interviewed?
Liz McPhail was one of them. I don't remember who the others were.
And did you have an understanding at the time as to what in your background qualified you for that position?
I guess just being an operator and familiar with our processes and our products.
And you listed a few items that you had responsibility for example, Arcos reporting. What's Arcos reporting?
Arcos reporting is, at that time, we were reporting quarterly all of our distributions to our next downstream direct customer,
And those reports went to whom?
DEA.
Okay. And so was it your, you had responsibility for completing those reports, is that?
For
right?
the distributor license.
And do you continue to have that responsibility to today?
Yes.
Tell me what just in general, what the Arcos reports to the DEA.
So Arcos is automation reports consolidated ordering system. And it is all of our receipts. So any product that we bring in, we record, and any product we ship out, we record. And so it's acquisitions and dispositions.
And how do you go about gathering the data that you include in that report?
For what time period? Because it's changed.
Okay, fair enough. Maybe you could tell me at the beginning how you did it and then how that process changed over the years.
So at the beginning, it was a basically a we call it DDS, Dangerous Drug System, would compile all of the data for the receipts and the shipments and download it into Arcos format, which is I don't know what it's a specific format, and then we would download it onto disk and mail that disk to DEA quarterly. Over time, we started reporting monthly at the request of DEA, and then in time DEA had enhance their systems to be able to report online. So now we have 2 computer systems that we merged together, our manufacturing and our distribution center inventory systems. We merge those together into a file that converts to Arcos format, and we upload it via a portal on a monthly basis.
Okay. When did the reports convert from quarterly to monthly, if you remember?
I don't remember exactly when.
Is there anyone else involved in the process of compiling the data and transmitting the Arcos reports?
For which DEA license?
Well, so are you involved in the Arcos reporting for other than the Hobart distribution license?
Now I am. Back at the beginning of my role, I was not. Now, as manager, there's another person that works under me, and she does the manufacturing DEA Arcos, and I do the distributor Arcos.
Okay.
And we're backup for each other.
Okay.
Sorry.
And when did that come to be, that you had someone working under you that you just described?
In April of 2017.
So prior to the time that you had this person working under you on the manufacturing license, was there anyone else involved in compiling or transmitting the Arcos reports that you had responsibility for?
No.
Was there any process in place to review the Arcos reports that you prepared for accuracy or completeness?
Objective form.
I'm not sure I understand. It's a computer download.
Okay, but so, well, let's go back to when it was a physical report that you were preparing and sending to the DEA. There was an actual paper report at some point, correct?
No, it was a file that we just put onto a disk, but Arcos requires it in a specific format, and it's not human readable. It's a number of fields all pressed together.
Okay, and so you would input the data into that format? Is that how it would be prepared?
We have a computer program that downloads it into that format.
And so your personal involvement in the preparation of the reports, what does it consist of?
Executing a series of steps that allows the computer to pull down the sales data and convert it to Arcos format. And then if there's any manual transactions or errors or returns, I would enter those into the computer system, which would download into that Arcos format.
Okay. So, and is that a description that's still current?
Yes.
Okay.
And it's the same for both DEA licenses.
Okay. So is there any process in place at Mallinckrodt, or has there been at any point, to review any of the steps that you take, that you just described, for accuracy, errors, completeness, etc.?
Objective form.
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. Is the Arcos reporting function something that is a subject of any annual goals that you set or reviews that you receive?
It was earlier in my career.
Okay. Goals or reviews, or both?
Both, that the reports were filed on time.
Okay. And other than timeliness, any other aspect of the reporting that was subject of any goals or reviews?
Not that I can recall.
Do you have an understanding of the purpose of from the DEA's standpoint, do you have an understanding of the purpose for the Arcos reports?
Objection to form.
At a very high level.
And what's that understanding?
Is that it reports all of the acquisitions and distributions. My Arcos report tells DEA everything we've acquired and everything we've distributed. And then if there's error reports, DEA will send us, after we file the report, DEA sends us an error report. And if there's errors in the Arcos data, then we fix those errors on the next quarterly report or now monthly report.
And does that happen regularly, that there are errors?
Not regularly, but on occasion.
And what's the nature of the errors typically?
If there's a key punch of a wrong digit and a wrong character that the system has downloaded, or if a DEA number was missed.
Okay. And the nature of the information that you submit in the Arcos report, you indicated what you acquired and what you distributed. At what level of detail is that information? Is it by, for example, API, or how is it categorized?
Objective form.
For which license?
The distributor license.
So it's by finished goods SKU, so the individual number of bottles, packaged unit, is so number of bottles received and number of bottles shipped. If there was any returns from a customer for any reason, or if there's been any waste, scrap.
Okay. And the bottles received in the case of the Hobart facility, from whom would they be received?
They could be received from the Hobart manufacturing facility or from an external manufacturer.
Okay. And so that manufacturer, whether it's Mallinckrodt Hobart or another manufacturer, they would be reporting on a separate Arcos report their receipt and then sale of those manufactured goods, correct?
Yes, correct.
And that's not a process you're involved in the Hobart facility, correct? Or at least until April 2017, you were not involved in that process?
No, I must misunderstand.
The process I'm referring to is whatever Arcos report related to Hobart's manufacturing activities. That report is not something that, at least until April 2017, you had any involvement in. Is that correct?
I was aware of it. I would help if there was a problem, but I was not the primary person responsible for reporting.
Okay. Do you know who was the primary person responsible for reporting?
Prior to 2005 was Sabrina Boughton. After 2005 was Carrie Johnson.
Okay. And currently the person who does that reporting reports to you, is that correct?
Yes.
And who is that?
Carrie Johnson.
Okay. And so since April of 2017, are you involved in actually working on the preparation of the manufacturing license Arcos report for the Hobart facility?
No.
Do you, in your capacity supervising Ms. Johnson, do you review any of the work that she does relative to that Arcos reporting?
No.
You indicated that prior to 2017, if there was an issue or a problem with the manufacturing license Arcos reporting at Hobart, you would sometimes get involved in that. Do you recall any particular issues or problems that arose from time to time?
Objection to form.
Nothing particular. If there was an error on the report came back and Carrie couldn't figure out what it was, I would help her.
In any of the, you indicated early on that there have been a number of DEA-sponsored seminars or other training sessions that you've attended. Has Arcos reporting been a subject of any of those sessions?
Yes.
And what's been the substance of that you can recall?
It was DEA training on the transaction codes and the format. That's where they introduced us to the new Arcos portal for us to be able to upload and what direction they were moving in, and what transaction codes to use for what specific business activity.
Okay, one of the other subject matters you indicated you had responsibility for is losses in transit. What did you mean by that phrase?
So if the carrier, if there was damage or a loss while the product was in transportation to the customer.
Okay, and is that something that's the subject of a regular report, or is it something that just reported on as it occurs?
Reported on as it occurs.
And how do you, how would you become aware of the circumstances that would then give rise to such a report?
We're either notified by the carrier that they've have a box that was damaged in transit, or a customer may contact our customer service department and say they received a box that was damaged in transit.
Okay, and so once you receive word of such an event, what do you do to act on that?
If there's just damage only, then we would notify the carrier, give them the tracking information, make them aware of the damage. Corporate tracks them on a scorecard. I don't know the details to that. And if there was contents missing, then we would work with the carrier to find out what happened to those contents and if they can be recovered.
And is that something you personally are involved in, working with the carrier when there's missing contents?
Yes.
And so how do you go about determining whether those contents can be recovered?
We will contact our security contacts with the carrier, initiate an investigation. They will start looking for the product in their facilities and everywhere that package transitioned. And it's typically the box is busted open while handling on their automated machinery, and a case has become separated, in which it goes to Overgoods. And then Overgoods notifies me that they have Mallinckrodt product. We bring it back to the distribution center and send it for destruction.
And Overgoods is what?
Overgoods is the department in which our specific carrier, any loose box that's found with anywhere within their system and they can't determine where it was coming from or where it was going to, because it's not in its original shipping container with the labels, goes to Overgoods. And then they inventory it and will have dedicated trace agents to be able to try to locate who was either the shipper or the recipient of that product.
Okay. So if the do losses in transit ever result in a report that goes to the DEA?
Yes.
And under what circumstances?
If the material is not located in Overgoods, we will file a DEA 106 report, notify them immediately.
Okay. And is that something that you're responsible for preparing?
Yes.
And what does the 106 report to the DEA?
It's their lost theft report. It gives the details around the shipment and the product and quantity that is unaccountable.
And is there such a report prepared any time any amount of controlled substance is lost in transit and not otherwise accounted for?
I don't understand the question.
Well, so the 106 report is, let me ask it a different way. Is that prepared on an event by event basis, that there was a particular loss in transit that where product cannot be accounted for ultimately, and therefore that gives rise to a particular 106 report that goes to the DEA?
Yes.
And would that be, is there any minimum amount of missing product that if you fall below the minimum, you don't have to do the 106 report, anything like that?
Mallinckrodt's policy is to report any controlled substances not accounted for.
Okay, even if it was one bottle
Yes.
or one pill?
Yes.
Okay. Can you give me a sense for the frequency, and if this changed over time, how it changed over time, the frequency of filing 106 reports with the DEA that you worked on?
There's not a frequency. It's if you have a loss that can't be accounted for, you report it.
Sure, I understand. In a typical, say, month period, do you have an estimate of how many 106 reports on average you would have filed?
What time frame?
Well, again, if it changed over time, really the entire time that you've been responsible, but if it's changed over time, how that's changed.
Objection to form.
We had more frequent losses in transit when we were using one particular carrier service. So I don't remember exactly. I know that there was more, which is the reason we changed the carrier service and upgraded to an express service in which our packages got more prioritized handling and pre-alerts, so that each station knew when a Mallinckrodt package was coming through so that they could watch it and make sure it was under CCTV coverage. And our 106s dropped dramatically. Currently, I file maybe rough estimates.
Sure.
I don't have my records in front of me. 4 to 5 a year.
And so the carrier that you changed from, who was the carrier that you had more loss experience with?
It was FedEx Ground Service, which back in the early time was formerly known as RPS, Roadway Packaging Services. And they weren't handling our product appropriately, and we were experiencing a lot of damages. So our corporate transportation team transitioned to FedEx Express Services.
Okay, and do you recall when that transition occurred?
I don't recall exactly.
Was it, say, before 2012?
Yes,
Before 2010?
it was mid-2000s. Could have been 5, 6, 7, 8.
So probably before 2010.
Yes.
Okay. And were the problems primarily damage, or were they losses that ultimately couldn't be accounted for?
Check to form.
They were predominantly damages.
Okay. And so, am I understanding correctly, if there's damage, but the product is all accounted for, that doesn't result in a 106 report, correct?
It depends on whether it was recovered quickly, because we have to report within 24 hours. So if we could recover within FedEx within 24 hours and we knew they had the product, it was in this overgoods, then we would not file. If we couldn't locate the product within 24 hours, we would file.
Okay. And what would happen if you couldn't locate within 24 hours, so you file the 106, and then you subsequently find out from FedEx that they're able to locate the product? Do you then update the DEA on that, or?
Yes, we file an amended DEA 106 and send the DEA a cover letter stating that the material has been recovered and brought back to the distribution center and destroyed.
Okay. So your estimate, and I realize it's a rough estimate, of 4 to 5 106 reports a year for the last several years. Are those 106 reports as to which ultimately the product was never actually recovered? Is that fair?
I don't know without looking at the records.
Okay. That estimate of roughly 4 to 5 a year, would that go back to as far back as whenever it was that you made the transition away from FedEx Ground?
I'd have to look at the records. I know what currently they're approximately 4 to 5 years, or
Okay.
4 to 5 a year. I don't recall specifically what they are prior for past years.
Okay, so for example, let's say the 2010 to 2014 timeframe. Do you have any sense of the average number of 106 reports that were filed in that timeframe?
No, I don't.
Okay. During the period of when you were using FedEx Ground, do you have a sense for approximately how many 106s on average are filed annually?
And not an exact number. It was significantly higher than what we currently have.
Was it twice as many?
I don't remember exactly.
Okay. Okay. I'd like to understand and I realize since 2001 we're dealing with a long time period here, so and some of this is going to necessarily be, a little fuzzy perhaps as to specific dates and that sort of thing. But I'd like to understand how your job responsibilities changed over the years, if they have changed. So if you can just, let's start with sort of a general description of how those responsibilities have changed over the years.
So I have received promotions throughout the years into different levels within the compliance group. I started out with just basic clerical, the Arcos reporting, data entry of waste transactions, discrepancy reporting with the carriers. Then my responsibilities increased, in which I took on facilitating and organizing the destruction of the waste, not just doing the data entry. Took on more responsibility in terms of just workload. Still doing the clerical, but then doing more involved with walkthroughs through the facility, learning more about CFR and the regulations, attended the training seminars, learned about Quota, and then I was a compliance analyst for a length of time, and then promoted into senior controlled substance compliance coordinator, facilitated DEA audits, was the DEA contact, was on the CSOS working team when DEA was instituting CSOS, which are electronic 222 forms, and then was promoted into the role of manager in April of 2017.
Okay, great. Oh, thank you. Let's go through some of those items. I think the Arcos reporting responsibility, I think you've already described, is a continuing one that you still have for the distribution license at Hobart, correct?
Yes.
And apart from the testimony you've already given us this morning, is there any other aspect of the Arcos reporting that's been your responsibility?
Currently?
Or at any time?
Well, currently the manufacturing is done by a person who reports to me,
Right.
so I oversee that, but nothing else in regards to Arcos.
Okay. And waste data entry, which you indicated was an early on responsibility. Is that something you still have responsibility for?
My team, but not myself.
Okay. And what does that waste data entry consist of?
So we track every single tablet, powder, capsule of waste that's a controlled substance, and those get, they're documented, weighed, documented, reported on our destruction reports. We enter, our team enters that into our computer system, which then currently sends all of the waste to a reverse distributor for destruction by incineration.
Okay. And you indicated your team is still responsible for that. Who on your team currently has that responsibility?
Carrie Johnson has the data entry portion.
Okay. Next item you indicated was discrepancy reporting. What's that?
So that's what we were talking about earlier with the carriers. Excuse me. With the carriers, that if there's any discrepancies in what we ship versus what the customer ordered, or if the customer ordered a wrong product, or we shipped a wrong product in error, any difference than what was intended to be ordered.
Okay, and so some of those discrepancies are the result of damage in transit, the sort of thing you described a little earlier today. It sounds like sometimes there's a misfilling of an order, though. What happens in those situations?
Objection to form.
Because of our cycle count program and the processes in the distribution center, we have not had in the last 10 years a shipping error where we meant to ship sugar-free and we shipped cherry or something because of the barcoding system. Prior to that, there could have been an instance where the wrong product was shipped, and then the customer would say, hey, we received the wrong product. We'd make arrangements to issue them a 222 form. We would document what happened, that it was our mistake, how we fix it, and then would make sure that the customer had all of the documentation they needed to document what happened, that they received the wrong item, it was returned back to Mallinckrodt. We received the incorrect item, we sent it for destruction.
Okay. And you also indicated sometimes the customer may have ordered the wrong item.
Frequently, we have situations where a customer will enter the wrong item in our order entry screen. They want buprenorphine 8.2 milligram and they order buprenorphine 2.5 milligram, and they get it and it's the wrong product and they have to send it back to us. And that's frequent. We have customer ordering errors.
Okay. And in that situation, is there any sort of report that gets generated when that happens, or how's it handled?
I apologize. The discrepancy report would document what transpired, and then we would document appropriately what actions we took to rectify.
Okay. And that discrepancy reporting, is that something that you're personally involved in?
Yes.
Okay. Another item you mentioned was destruction of waste. Is that the process you described a few moments ago, where you ship the waste to a reverse distributor for destruction?
Yes.
And is that shipment of that waste, is that documented with the DEA somehow?
It's, if they're C1 and 2s, they are documented via a 222 form, 3, 4s, and 5s, a transfer of controlled substance form.
Okay.
And it is Arcos reported as well.
Okay. So the either the 222 form or the transfer form that you mentioned, are those things that you have responsibility for?
Yes.
Is there a regular process for the destruction of waste, or is it handled on an as-needed basis?
Monthly. We schedule a pickup by the reverse distributor to take care of all of the waste generated from the previous month, because it has to be stored in cages and vaults. So if we don't have it removed monthly, we tend to run into space problems.
Okay. Another thing you mentioned were walkthroughs. What did you mean by that?
So we go up on the manufacturing floor and just walk through the facility daily to make sure that materials are being stored in compliance with the regulations. There's nothing being left out. There's no residual powders anywhere they shouldn't be. Everything is sealed. Just being there for questions for the floor. If somebody has a question, how do they handle something?
Okay. And so when you say we do that daily, who's we in that setting?
I do it daily. When I'm not there, a member of my team will do it.
Okay. So describe for me, if you would, the Hobart facility and just the physical setup relative to your office, for example, since you walk through it daily. I mean, about how large is the facility?
I don't know square footage or any of that kind of thing. It's a big facility, but I don't know the square footage.
Is it multi-story or
Yes,
single-story?
there are multiple floors.
Okay. So the walkthrough that you do every day, how long does it take you?
45 minutes to an hour.
Okay. Are there particular things you look for when you're doing the walkthrough?
Just to make sure everything's stored appropriately and within compliance.
And one of the actually right after walkthroughs, you indicated learning more about the CFRs and regulations, and part of your walkthrough, I take it, is to satisfy yourself that the facility is in compliance with applicable regulations, correct?
To ensure we're always in compliance, yes.
And so describe for me the process you've gone through over the years to learn about and stay current on the applicable regulations.
So I've read CFR a number of times. I refer to it often if there's questions. If we were unsure of an interpretation of CFR, we may have reached out for DEA to their field office for interpretation or asked them while they were on site for an audit. So I've learned from DEA what their expectations are, what they want. Attended the DEA training seminars that are sponsored by DEA, in which they go over their expectations or break down CFR into more detail. We do practice exercises on Quota at those training seminars. They talk about imports and exports, how to fill out the forms, and how to do the calculations in the way that they want them so that they can process them more efficiently.
Okay. Is that an ongoing? Do you still go to the seminars that DEA sponsors?
When they have them, they haven't been having them as frequently as they did. They used to have them every other year, and it's been a couple of years since they've had them.
Okay. So during the time since 2001, when you became involved in compliance, about how many DEA-sponsored trainings have you been to?
More than a dozen.
Okay. And are these multi-day programs?
Usually they're 2 days.
Okay. And you also indicated you've attended the Buzzio training, correct?
Yes.
How often have you done that?
Just about every year.
Okay. Up to the current?
Yes.
Okay. And what's the subject matter that's typically covered at the Buzzio conferences?
They usually have a DEA speaker that's talking about NPRMs and what's on their agenda and what they're working on. They'll have subject matter experts on state licensing and different laws that individual states are enacting in regards to controlled substances. They'll have roundtable discussions on industry topics. It's usually a 2.5-day conference.
Okay. Are there particular, for example, the roundtable discussions, particular ones that you make a point of participating in at these conferences?
Yes.
Which are those?
Suspicious order monitoring, state licensing, exports. DEA has an initiative with streamlining the customs documentation through a database with exports.
Okay. So let me be sure, I just want to be sure we've covered all the various sort of formal DEA-related training conferences and seminars that you've gone to. You indicated about a dozen or so of the DEA-sponsored programs, although there hasn't been one in the last at least couple of years, correct?
Correct.
And then the Buzzio, those are one a year?
Annual, yeah.
Okay. Are there other training programs of that type that you've attended?
Natty, but not Natty's. They have DEA speakers sometimes, but it's more about what's going on in the industry.
Okay. And do you attend the Natty conferences regularly?
I have occasionally.
About how many times?
Half dozen, roughly.
How recently can you recall going to one?
Last year, I went to the Natty conference last year.
Are they annual?
They are.
Okay. Apart from Natty, Buzzio, and the DEA sponsored, any other ones you can think of?
Years ago, I attended the Pharmaceutical Security Coalition, PSC, many years ago, and it was only once. It was more geared towards physical security.
One of your answers a moment ago, you made reference to, I think it was NPRM.
Notice of proposed rulemaking.
Okay. Thank you. Do you recall any particular proposed rules that were covered in any of the conferences you attended?
Recently, there is one for they're trying to eliminate the carbon 222 forms. So there's been a notice of proposed rulemaking for one-page 222 forms. And there was a recent one, but off the top of my head, it's escaping me.
Okay.
Oh, quota. There's a recent NPRM regarding quota.
Okay. You've mentioned quota a couple of times, and what's been your responsibility over the years with respect to quota?
Initially, I had very little to do with quota. In more recent years, I've been involved with compiling and reviewing the quota letters for increases throughout the year. The initial quota requests are prepared by my team and I review.
And when you say quota, what do you, just so the record's clear what we're talking about here, what do you mean by quota?
Quota is the DEA allocation system for the manufacturing of controlled substances.
And would your involvement be with respect to the manufacturing activities at the Hobart facility?
Yes, quota only applies to the manufacturing license. It doesn't apply to the distributor license.
And is it specific to facility by facility?
Yes.
Okay. And so to the extent there's a quota for Mallinckrodt St. Louis facility, that's not something you have an involvement with, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Do you know who has the corresponding role, the role that corresponds to your role at Hobart with respect to the St. Louis quota
That
for
would be,
manufacturing?
sorry, my counterpart, Dave Hunter.
Okay. And the quota, focusing on the Hobart-related quota that you do have responsibility for, when did you first have responsibility for quota?
So it was predominantly overseen by Karen Harper. It was compiled by Carrie Johnson. I would assist and review for a second set of eyes. And then Karen Harper ultimately approved the letter for submission. Carrie, at that time, prior to 2017, reported directly to Karen Harper.
Okay. And so the actual submission, has that always been Ms. Harper's responsibility?
To review, I need clarification
Sure.
of actual submission.
Well, maybe-
Entering it into the database or?
Yeah, well, let me back up. You said you made reference to your involvement being a second set of eyes, or was there any time when you had more involvement than simply being a second set of eyes?
Currently, I do.
Okay, and so when did you take on that additional responsibility?
When Carrie Johnson started reporting to me.
In 2017?
Yes.
Okay. So prior to 2017, when Ms. Johnson started to report to you, in the second set of eyes role that you mentioned, what did your activities consist of with respect to quota?
Reviewing it for grammatical content in terms of if I had heard through my role, maybe we had taken on a new contract or been awarded business and Carrie hadn't included that in her request, I would remind her about that or let her know about that so it could be inclusive in the request, advising DEA of all the information that we had available to us.
Okay. And you indicated that initially you had very little responsibility with quota, and then that changed over time. Did you have more responsibility when you began reporting to Ms. Harper?
Objection to form.
I don't understand the question.
I'm just trying to understand when you started to have this additional responsibility, this second eyes review of the quota applications?
So that would have been, I got more involved in roughly 2014, 2015. Carrie and I both reported to Karen. Carrie had her set of responsibilities. I had my set of responsibilities. But in roughly 14 or 15, I was cross-training more in taking on more responsibilities to advance to manager. So in that learning, I needed to learn more about quota, so then I started getting more involved in quota.
Okay. So what did you do to learn more about quota?
More thorough on the letters, understanding them, learned more about the market and the dynamics that go on in the supply chain, and the quota section training on from the DEA seminars.
And so the DEA seminars on quota training, what are the topics they cover in that context?
Research versus manufacturing, where does the quota belong, when do you start needing quota. Karen mentored me because she had a lot of experience with quota.
So when you say research versus manufacturing, what did you mean by that?
So there's researcher license and there's manufacturing licenses. And quota is not required on a research license, but it is required on a manufacturing license. So what project development work can be executed under a research license not requiring quota, and what project development work needs to be executed on a manufacturing license that does require quota.
Okay. And is that also what you meant when you said when you start needing quota? Is that this research versus manufacturing distinction?
No, when we start needing quota is when the current quota is not sufficient for our demand plan and we need to ask for more quota. Reviewing the market demand, what's needed, and how much we have will last us.
Okay. So describe for me generally how the quota process works from your perspective. The DEA provides a quota allocation for the Hobart manufacturing facility from time to time, correct?
Yes, we have an initial grant, and then if that initial grant is not enough to support, to get you through the full calendar year, you can ask for more quota throughout the year.
Okay, and so that initial grant is granted with respect to an upcoming calendar year?
Yes. It's applied for on April 1st of the preceding year. So we take, for example, this April 1st coming up, we will take our supply plan for 2020 of what's needed in the market and convert that into API, so how much API we need, and then that will be applied for with DEA by April 1st for 2020.
Okay, and then the DEA acts on that application at some point prior to the upcoming January 1, provides the quota allocation for the upcoming calendar year, correct?
Yes.
And so the quota allocation, and when you say API, I mean that's active pharmaceutical ingredient, correct?
Yes.
And so is the quota that the DEA grants for the upcoming year, is that on an API by API basis?
Yes.
And
By
is it-
molecule.
By molecule. Okay, so it isn't with respect to particular dosage, for example. Is that right?
I don't understand.
So,
what you
for
mean.
example, would you have a certain allocation of oxycodone for the calendar year as compared to an allocation of 20 milligram tablets, 30 milligram tablets, etc.?
Yes, your application is submitted by dosage form.
Okay, so for each API, the API is then broken down to in different dosages,
Yes.
and that's how ultimately the DEA, when they grant the quota, that's how it's granted.
I don't know what formula DEA uses to grant it. We fill our application and we tell DEA what we want and what we're going to make with it. Very, very seldom do we get a 100% grant.
Okay, but whatever grant you get, it is expressed in terms of by API, by dosage?
When we are given the grant, we are given just the total API. So we apply for it specifying the dosage, but when the grant comes, there's no dosage specified.
Okay.
And if they haven't given us 100%, we don't know what they're expecting us to make with it.
Okay, so let's just use oxycodone for an example. I mean, that's an API, correct? Oxycodone?
Yes.
Okay. And so when you submit the application, you would have that broken down in various dosages
Yes.
and certain number of tablets in each dosage, correct?
Yes.
And you could add up how many molecules are in all those tablets and then come up with a gross amount of oxycodone API that's covered by your application, correct?
That's what the application amount is for, what all those dosage units compile total.
Okay. But then when the when the DEA actually grants the quota, it's simply an amount of that API.
Yes.
Okay. And so, and that grant, as you indicated, may or frequently is less than the gross amount that was applied for, correct?
Correct.
And so when that happens, do you have an understanding, once you have that quota grant, and it's let's say it's less than the gross amount that was applied for, what the Hobart facility is permitted to then manufacture in terms of different dosages under that quota grant?
So the business will decide based on the demand plan and the market demand what we'll make with the quota that we've been granted.
Okay. And so is there any need to go back to the DEA for any further update on the quota or clarification once you make the determination of what to manufacture in light of the quota that was granted?
No.
Okay. Why don't we take a short break? We can go for over an hour.
The time is 10:13 a.m. and we're off.